All right. Well, let's go ahead and get this started here. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today. Appreciate it. This is a very good mechanism to be able to reach out to so many different people that I wish I would have a chance to reach out in person with, but this is the next best thing. So thank you very much for your time joining. Let me first talk about the presentation at hand, what I'll be talking about today, and then I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking about who I am, what I do, and then we'll jump into the demonstrations and everything else. All right. So you should be able to see my screen here. It says customizing SharePoint 2010 list forms using SharePoint Designer and InfoPath. All right. Lists, libraries, of course, are very, very fundamental, very, very core to SharePoint in general, and that's how it's been since the beginning, since SharePoint 2001, and it will remain that way. So the interface of the list or library, of course, primarily are views of the lists and libraries. You go into a list, you see actually the data presented, but then when you want to change the information, you want to, for example, edit some information, or you want to create new information, for example, a new announcement, a new calendar item. Well, that you do through a form, obviously. Now, these forms have been around since the beginning, of course, and they've gotten better and better and better and more robust, but still to this day, I feel many times personally, and I'm sure you feel the same way, that's why you're here, that there are times you want to present different type of information, maybe in a different format, maybe hide some information, or show some additional information that's not already there. So to do all that stuff, you need to modify these forms. The new form, the edit form, the display form. And until 2007, the technologies we had, well, until 2010, I should say, the technology we had that we could do that with was only SharePoint Designer. So SharePoint Designer 2007 lets you, in a no-code way, change the list forms or library forms. And of course, you could do it with many different code ways, but we're not talking about code right now. This is a completely no-code session. All of my sessions are like that, completely no-code. But now in 2010, products and technologies, Microsoft has provided us an additional way, which is using InfoPath 2010 to modify the forms. So what I want to talk about here today is what is the difference between the two? How would you do it using SharePoint Designer 2010 now, and how would you do it using InfoPath 2010? What are the advantages and disadvantages of both? Because there are advantages and disadvantages of both, actually. So we'll talk about that. Once again, over here, as it says, my name is Asif Rahmani, and let me talk a little bit more about what I do, then we'll jump into the actual demonstration, okay? So I'm a SharePoint Server MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. As Marshall was saying, I am the author and the guy who delivers the SharePoint Designer 2010 class. It's a 5-day, well, it's a 4-day class now. I'm delivering it next week in Houston. We deliver it all around the country. I love that class, not just because I wrote it, because there's so many opportunities that we present in that thing, and people always walk away extremely happy with all the opportunities available that they can do with no code customization of SharePoint. So definitely check that out. We do webcasts. We do in-person classes. There are many, many more coming up throughout the year. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or reach out to Marshall, I'm sure, and we can help you out with that. I'm also a principal contributor to a site called SharePoint-videos.com. And SharePoint-videos.com came about from people like you, feedback from people like you, because people wanted to see in a nice, easy, digestible format how to do certain things, right? How do I install SharePoint? How do I customize my site? How do I work with themes in the site? How do I work with reporting services? Or there's a new thing called business connectivity services that I can make using SharePoint Designer 2010. How do I do that? So we've been, myself, a few of other team members, we've been making these kind of videos for a long, long time now. We have 240 plus videos out there at SharePoint-videos.com. Very, very focused on certain topics at hand. So check it out. If you have any feedback, let me know. This really definitely goes hand in hand with the critical path training concept, where we're very much focused on the SharePoint education piece, and this is more ongoing if you wanted to have these videos on demand. So check it out. Let us know if you have any feedback on that. Here are some of the books that I've had the opportunity to contribute to. Our old book is SharePoint Designer 2007. That's this one right here. The new one is the Beginning SharePoint Designer 2010 book. Definitely, I think you should pick that up if you have interest in SharePoint Designer stuff. And then also I'm a contributor to the Real World SharePoint 2010 book, in which I wrote about the InfoPath and SharePoint Designer piece together. And I would love it if any of you came to a conference and came to a session of mine and say, hey, I saw you or I heard you in a virtual session. Love meeting people at conferences. So that's what I do. All right, that's enough. Let me get on with the session now. Lots of demos coming up. I would recommend for this environment, go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. Okay, so Q&A, there's a question section. Go to webinar, put it there, and we'll try to get to it. Either Marshall or I will try to get to it. You will hopefully take away a lot from this presentation, no matter what your skill level is right now. But if you already have information in your head about SharePoint Designer and InfoPath concepts to begin with, I think you're going to be much better shape to digest all this information. And also, lastly, you know, the demo environment that I'll be using today, it's available for you completely the way it is that I'll show you right now to start using right away. And I use something called CloudShare for that. So here's a URL for it, tinyurl.com/AsifCloudShare. They'll basically ask you your name and your email address to get your CloudShare account, and you'll get a complete clone of my virtual environment. Everything that I'm doing right now is already done in that environment. You can see, play around with it, make your own solutions, whatever you want. And it's free for 14 days, and then after that, if you wish to continue, you can continue that. Okay, so let's talk about the, I have one slide and then I'm going to demo. Okay, SharePoint Designer 2010 is an awesome way to be able to modify your SharePoint list forms. Having said that, there's of course a newer way in InfoPath 2010 to do it. Does that mean that SharePoint Designer 2010 will not support it ongoing forward? Absolutely not. There's definitely a need still for SharePoint Designer to be able to modify the forms. That's how I've been doing it for many years now, until I started doing InfoPath. And you know, one major reason you might want to modify your list form using SharePoint Designer is because SharePoint Designer doesn't cost anything. InfoPath, there's licensing for it. So InfoPath, if you just go out and buy it, it's a couple $100. If you were to get it through Office Suites, you get it through Office Ultimate, Office Professional Plus, Office Enterprise, and so forth. But otherwise, you got to buy it. And the second reason is at the server level. At the SharePoint server level, you need to have the enterprise license running for you to be able to use InfoPath to modify your SharePoint list forms. And I'll talk more about that stuff later also when I talk about InfoPath, but I just want to mention it right now. So the licensing is the big piece that differentiates these two things, where with doing it this way, doing a SharePoint Designer way, you just need SharePoint Foundation. That's all you need. And you need SharePoint Designer, which is completely free. The other way, you need licensing at the client and the server level to be able to make your list form modifications. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about here. All right, switch to my environment. Here it is. So this is the environment that I was talking about. I'm going to show you just quickly over here the pre-built environment. Okay. Here we go. Click here for the demonstration of customizing SharePoint list forms and InfoPath. So if you would go here and you go here, tasks, form modified using SPD. Click on add new item. So this is the task list, and I'll click on add new item. Oops, sorry. This one actually is the out of the box form. Nothing has been done to it. I guess I'm glad I clicked on it because I wanted to show you how it looks like to begin with. And then if I were to go ahead and edit one of these items, there we go. So you see the modifications that I've done. I know they're kind of tacky, unfortunately, but regardless, the modifications that I've done over here were done through SharePoint Designer. Okay, and this is all pre-built. It's all done. You just get to this environment using the URL that I showed you, and you can just get access to it right away. Very cool concept. Now I'm going to show you how you can build that from scratch. Okay, so let me go to the site that I created for you guys, which is CPT Webinar. All right, hopefully your screen is refreshing quickly. Although, I'll try to slow down a little bit. All right, a brand new vanilla site, nothing has been done to it yet. I'm going to go down to the tasks list, which is in my navigation pane. Click on it. No tasks here. And when I click on add new item, here's a form, right? That's the form we see when we click on add new item, and a similar form appears when you have editing of an existing item. So we want to modify this particular form, or actually let's modify the edit form. That's the one we'll modify today. All right, how do you get to this thing? You can click on Site Actions, Edit in SharePoint Designer. This will open up this particular site in SharePoint Designer. Now, if you don't have SharePoint Designer 2010 already, you want to go ahead and download it. Just look for SharePoint Designer. I'm going to advise, though, that you, and let me just go ahead and write that down. So SharePoint Designer 2010, you want to get the 32-bit version. There's also a 64-bit version, but I've been recommending people to get 32-bit. Doesn't matter what your machine is right now, 32-bit or 64-bit. But you want to use the 32-bit. There are some issues, I hate to say it, but there are some issues in 64-bit. So you want to use 32-bit instead. There's no really lack of functionality of using 32-bit. So, all right. So I'm looking at the CPT webinar site here. Lots of stuff you can do in SharePoint Designer. We'll go to Lists and Libraries, and then I'll click on Tasks List. Okay, so here's the summary page view of the task list. That's what this is. Shows a lot of good information, list information, customization, settings, workflows attached to this list, which there are none right now. What I'm interested in this case is the forms section. Let me go ahead and click on, for example, the current edit form.aspx. Show you what it looks like. Okay, so it's coming up. Loading the master page first. You see what this form is like right now? You know, SharePoint Designer 2010 really prides itself in being a good WYSIWYG system. And WYSIWYG, to those of you who are not familiar with this term, is what you see is what you get. Let me change the font to be a little bit bigger. Okay, so what you see is what you get. That's what SharePoint Designer, almost all of it, is completely all about. But in this case, that is not true. This is what you see is not what you get, because this is actually at the design time over here. It does not show us exactly what it's going to look at the runtime. It just has generic column 1, column 2, column 3. And the reason for this is Microsoft decided that for the SharePoint list forms, they're still going to use the old list form web part. That's what this is. This is the old list form web part. This is not the new one. The new one is the XSLT list web part, the list form web part. This is not using XSLT. XSLT stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformation. And this one is using the old ASP.NET, actually the old CAML technology, the Collaborative Application Markup Language technology, which, by the way, runs great, but the customization for that is extremely painful. So you know what I see people doing sometimes is they go to this form and they say, I don't want that. Let me go ahead and delete it. So let me hit delete button on my keyboard. It's gone. And then I can go ahead and put in a new form here, right? So I can go to Insert. Let's see what kind of forms I have. New item form, edit item form, display. Well, this is an edit edit form. So I'll click on Edit Item Form and choose my task list here. And here we go. Right, so I have some type of form. There's nothing showing here, but I can put items here. Now, this will work fine, actually, for the most part, but I've seen issues in varying environments. For example, sometimes if you do it this way, sometimes when you click on the Save button, it saves a row twice. Like it saves a blank row and it makes a row that you want it to make. And that usually happens because you still have the ghost version of the old web part still sitting around that you don't know about. Or sometimes it just doesn't work for some reason, like sporadically. And that I've not been able to figure out exactly why it does that, but I've seen that happening in some environments. I'm not sure exactly what they did to make that happen. The moral of the story here, the best practice here, is to not do it this way. That's at least what I recommend. These forms that have been designed already, the edit form.aspx right here that you see, it was designed by Microsoft. So if you mess around with this and then later Microsoft decides, we're going to go ahead and change our form in the next service pack or something, well, you're kind of out of luck, right? Because then it's going to reset everything that you've done. So what I advise is, let me go ahead and go back to a task list. Do you want to save changes? Absolutely not. What I would advise is you go ahead and make a new form. So you go to Form section in the task list here. You click on New. Very easy to do, actually. You give it the name. As a former developer, I don't like having spaces in my file name. You can if you wanted to, but it's a good practice to not. And make the file name short too. And here, I'm going to say that this is going to be the edit item form, right? Edit item form. And also, let's make this the default form for the edit functionality. Great. Okay, so you see what happens? Edit tasks, edit type form, default form. Great. If you want to switch a different one to be default, like edit form, you can always do that by going to the Set as Default button on top. Easy enough. Now let's go ahead and look into this form to see what it looks like. Okay. One thing you'll notice right away is that, the promise that I gave you before, which was, oh yeah, the WYSIWYG and all that stuff, you should be able to see all the fields, like in this case would be the task ID, the description, the priority, the status, and all that stuff. You don't see any of that here. Honestly, when I first did this a long time ago in SharePoint Designer, I was completely flabbergasted. I was like completely confused, thinking what's going on, why it's not showing me anything. Then somebody else actually pointed this out to me, one of the Microsoft folks a long time ago, because this functionality works the same in SharePoint Designer 2007, that you need to have some item in the task list first. So I'm going to go to the task list, click on Add New Item. Here, just say, how about this thing? Create a project plan. All right. So as long as you have something in the task list, then it's going to work fine. Otherwise, it will not. That's the deal over here. Due date, we'll put in 2 days from now. Okay. So now you have a task here, and because you're editing the edit form in SharePoint Designer, as long as you have a task, it will show you all the fields, which, let's see, if I refresh, does it show it to me? There we go. If you did not have the fields, then it would not show it to you. All right, let's get some space here. I'm working in a 1024 by 768 environment, so I can show you everything nicely in your screen too. So making it smaller here. All right. Great. So now, what can I do here? Well, first thing, this is my form. This is exactly what it looks like right now. I look at the bottom and I see the attachment field, and I say to myself, you know what? I don't want to provide the attachments field in my edit form. So when somebody makes a new task, yes, they can attach something to the task, but nobody later, when they're editing a task, should be able to attach something. Okay, easy enough. I can click on here. Let me get rid of this thing. Okay, so I can click on this cell, go to the table properties and the data view tools, because that's what this really is. This is a data view. And here I'm going to say let's delete. Where's my delete? Delete. Delete the row. Just like that. It's gone. Great. Now I say to myself that what about all these titles, all these labels that I have? Let's make them stand out a bit. So let me highlight the whole thing. Shift, select. There we go. And now that everything is highlighted, I'll go ahead and say home and bold. Great, everything is in bold. In addition, we'll go to the table section over here, change the shading, make it light gray. Okay. I don't know why I didn't change the title. It should have been bold over here too. Let me change that. All right. So all good. Let's make it more visually appealing by putting my company logo right in the form. Go to Insert. This is a fictional company logo that I'll be putting in here. So I'll go Insert, Picture, and I have AdventureWorks as one of the pictures. Insert. Always in SharePoint Designer, when you put in a picture, it asks you for the alternate text. It is very highly recommended that you want to put in the alternate text here for accessibility reasons. So in here it's going to be AdventureWorks, or this should be the better way of doing it, not just abbreviating it. Okay. All right. And as you can see that in SharePoint Designer, working with pictures is far more powerful than if you were to work with pictures in the browser, right? So you can make it bevel, grayscale, washout, change the contrast, brightness, wrapping style, etc. Rotate. Let me make it a little bit smaller. All right. Now what else? Next thing that I would say to myself is, how about this? How about if I don't want anybody to be able to change, excuse me, to be able to change the due date? Because I don't want people to be able to change the due date afterwards, after the due date has been assigned to the task. Let me get rid of this thing completely. So I'll click on Table, Delete, and Delete Cell. Gone. This was part of my data. Well, it is still part of my data actually that is in this data source, this task data source. So it appears right here in my current data source. Right here, due date. So I have the due date. I want the due date to go over here, but I want the due date to just be in a read-only format. So in our case, we'll click on Insert Selected Fields as Formatted in Datetime View. And I don't want to show time. I want to show date, and the date that I want to show is going to be in this type of format. Okay, Thursday, April 14th. Let's see what happens here. Okay, just 1 second. All right. So what happened here, it put this as a label, which is great. That's exactly what I wanted. That's one way of accomplishing this thing. I will show you another way. This other way is, depending on who you are, it could be more complicated. It could be very straightforward. You actually need to go to the properties of this tag. So you right-click on this, to the properties, and let me show you the tag properties. See, there's lots of stuff you can do with this particular field. Oops. For example, changing the display format, making it valid or not valid, changing the list ID, which I don't think you want to do that, but one thing that you have here is the control mode. I'm going to change that from edit to display only. Now, in the view here, it didn't change anything, but believe me that when I show you this start date, which is going to be, once again, this is not going to be editable anymore. When I show this to you in the form, you know, it will be completely uneditable. Okay. All right. So far so good. Let me go ahead and save my changes. Here's the really small save button that we have on top left. I wish Microsoft had made it a big save button because it's extremely important. I think you need to save everything after you do it, otherwise nothing will show up. It's saying that the picture that you uploaded, Asif, that has to go somewhere. I suggest that it goes into the Site Assets folder, or really the Site Assets library within the site, which is definitely the recommended place for it. So I'm going to accept it. Kind of okay. All right. So it's saved. All's well. Now there's one other thing that I would like to do, so let me go ahead and attempt this. I know there's something in the data view tools here called conditional formatting, right? And it says I can go ahead and format things depending on certain conditions. Okay, I'm sure many of you worked with it before. So one thing that I would like to do is, let's work with priority. Okay, priority is normal, high, or low. That's a 3 priority, right? If it's normal priority, I want it to be just yellow. If it's high priority, I want this thing to just turn red. And if it's low priority, I would like this condition, this drop-down box here, to turn green. Well, I'll go to conditional formatting, and you can do this really nicely with all kinds of controls, by the way, and HTML controls, regular data view controls, list view controls. So I'm going to attempt to do it with this in a list form. We'll say format selection. Selection that I want to format is going to be based upon, what was that again? Priority. Yeah, priority. If that equals high, which is great, that's what I want. Let's set the style. And the style that I want to set is I want the background color to be, let's make it light red. More like orange, I think. Something like that. And there's so much more you can do, by the way, here, and it just shows you the style attribute that it created for you. I'll click on OK. Look at this. Now, this is an expected error, so don't worry. But it says Microsoft.SharePoint.WebControls.form field does not have a public property name style. So this form field that we're working with, in fact, every form field, of course, has a way to style things, a way that it can be styled. But it's saying that it's not public. It's not exposed. It's not available to us to be able to use. So even though what we did was perfectly okay and would have worked in almost every other instance, for the SharePoint list form modification, this is not supported. That's what this is saying. So let me undo this, save this form again, and I'm done all that I wanted to do here. Let's go ahead and check this out to see what I've done. I wasn't able to do everything, but I was able to do some stuff, right? Let's see, refresh. Here's my old form. If I click on add new item, it shows me my old form, the way it used to look. Okay. For my new form, I'll click on edit item here like that. Okay, so now, excuse me. Now here, this shows me the edit form for this list. AdventureWorks is my logo, title, predecessors, priority, everything is in highlighted, it's bold, and it's gray. We have everything else we didn't touch. We tried to change the priority, but of course that didn't change. It's too bad. Start date, due date, all labeled, great, right? It did let us accomplish almost everything we wanted to accomplish. You know, there are other things that you might want to do also, which, for example, right now you see the title field is a required field marked by this asterisk. If you wanted to say, for example, I want the description field to also be a required field. Absolutely, it is possible to do that in SharePoint Designer, but I'll warn you, if you attempt this thing, that it takes a while to get to that. You have to put in a required field validator, you have to attach it to this to this form field, then you have to give it the exact kind of error that it's going to display and where is it going to display. So all that stuff is possible, but it's very much developer-like kind of stuff that you do by doing it this way. So all this stuff you can do using SharePoint Designer completely free and using either SharePoint Foundation, SharePoint Server, either one, that's fine. No charge at all for all that stuff. Microsoft does provide a better way of making all this stuff happen, which is using InfoPath, and I'm going to show you that right now. So this, by the way, the environment that I'm using, oops, what happened here? Come on, environment. Okay, so I'm running this in Firefox. You can run this thing in Internet Explorer, whatever you want. But this is my environment right here that I'm running in right now, and I was doing full screen. And this is what the one I was talking about. You can have it, a complete clone of my environment with everything built at that URL that I provided, which I'll show you again at the end. So the next thing that I want to show you here is also already built in that environment. It's the InfoPath stuff. InfoPath provides a great way to make a visual layout, get the form logic going. Oops, what happened here? Form logic that you want to formulate in the form. For example, this should be a required field. This should be a date before today or after today, things like that. And also data connections. If you want to make a data connection from InfoPath to any other repository like a web service, database, SharePoint list or library, XML file, RSS web service, RSS service, whatever you want to do, you can do, which works out great. So the touch points that InfoPath has with SharePoint are as follows. First one, you can make form library forms, which we're not talking about in this webinar. If you go to the SharePointVideos.com site, you'll see many different instances of how you can make form library forms. We teach about this in our class also, in Critical Path Training class and SharePoint Designer class. So we go this in depth for that. And for that, you only need a SharePoint Foundation. That's all you need. If you wanted to show the form library forms in the browser, then you need SharePoint Server Enterprise. For modifying workflow forms, you need SharePoint Server Standard. So that's also a functionality that we will not get a chance to touch upon here. It is available in our class. It is available in our SharePoint video site. But this requires only SharePoint Server Standard licensing, okay, to be able to modify the workflow forms using InfoPath. Lastly, this is the one that we will be talking about, which is in order to modify SharePoint list forms, you need InfoPath client, of course, and you need SharePoint Server Enterprise running. Okay. Here's what it looks like. So here's a depiction of what I want to make happen. And actually, I'm going to be doing more modifications than what is showing here. But I'll modify the list form for this task list, a different task list, excuse me, using InfoPath. And also, in addition, what you can do is you can encapsulate the form that you've made for a list or a library, both of them, in an InfoPath form web part. Once again, InfoPath form web part also it requires SharePoint Server Enterprise. Okay, so you need to have SharePoint Server Enterprise in order to get the InfoPath form web part. You can just go to click on Add a Web Part and go to the Web Part Gallery. And if you don't see it, then chances are you don't have SharePoint Server Enterprise. Or the reason would be that your server administrator has decided to turn the InfoPath form web part off. That's the two reasons if you don't see it. All right, enough talking through the PowerPoint slides, which I don't enjoy too much. I'm very much into demonstrating and explaining information, so I'll get into that. And pretty soon, once we're done with this thing, we'll take questions. Okay, so let me get back into my cloud share environment here. Full screen. Excuse me. Okay, for this one, let's make a new task list. So list, task list. Here we go. Just so we don't pollute the other one that we already have, tasks to create. So here's my task list. Here's my task to list. And for this one, we'll go ahead and put in a couple of tasks here too. Just task 1. How's that? Save. Task 2. Since I'm so creative. All right. Now, to modify this list or the list forms, I need to go to the List tab. It appears kind of small in my screen right now just because I'm running in a lower resolution. Yours will appear, I'm sure, much better when you're in your production environment. And also, there should be a button here called a Customize Form button, which is not visible just because the ribbon kind of scrunches it up and puts it underneath this thing here. Once again, because of resolution. So I'll click on Customize Form, which is right here. Very easy, very quick. I have a really quick environment here too. So what it's doing here, it opened up InfoPath, which of course I have in my on my desktop. So all programs, Office, I got everything here. Office, InfoPath Designer. So I'm going to go ahead and in here put in a picture of my company like I did in SharePoint Designer. Insert picture, see demos, AdventureWorks. There we go. Very easy, right? Make it small. And at the bottom here, what I'll decide to do is, the task for the title, I don't want it to be on this row here. I would rather just take this, drag it, put it right there underneath the picture or the logo. I don't need this row anymore, so I'll right click on this thing, delete row. I'll go to this text box here which is labeled title, and I'll say, let's go to home, make the text within it bold, change the font from Calibri to, we'll make it Britannic bold, and also we'll change the font to 14, maybe change the font color to blue or something. Of course nothing is being shown right now. It's going to show up when I actually go into a task in the browser. Alright, next thing, I'll take all these fields over here and we'll do the same exact thing we did in SharePoint Designer. Make it all bold. Go to Table Tools Layout, change the shading to make it light gray. Great. You might have noticed already, and especially if you worked with InfoPath, I'm sure you can attest to this thing, that InfoPath is very similar to working in Word, Microsoft Word. That was actually one of the main objectives of the InfoPath team when they were making it, to make it as easy or almost as easy as to use Microsoft Word. That's why it's so much easier from every level. If you're a developer, if you're an IT professional, if you're a power user, end user, to be able to learn this application for form designing compared to SharePoint Designer, which does require a little bit more technical acumen, I believe at least. Alright, so additional thing that I want to do, how about this due date thing? Now, what I want to do here for due date is I want to compare this against the start date. Okay, so I want to make sure that due date is not before the start date, which of course would not make sense, but you never know, somebody might have made or tried to make the due date before start date. So in that case, I'll click on this, I'll go to Home tab, I'll say add a rule, and we can say, we can just say it like that too, that if it's in the past, then there's a problem. So this is actually a rule that we're making, right? This is a rule that we're making. This is a way to make a quick rule. If you wanted to manage the rules manually, you would click on the Manage Rule button right here. So add rule, like I said before, we can compare it against another field, or we can just simply say that, hey, if it's ever in the past, which should not be possible, let's do that. Show a validation error. Okay, that was simple, right? If due date is less than today and due date is not blank, it's a validation type, enter today's date or a date in the future, which makes sense. Currently it's called Rule 1. Always better to make it something that makes more sense. So how about due date should be in future. Make this nice and big so you remember, you can understand exactly what it is when you come back to it later. Similarly, I'll go to priority. And by the way, these tools that I have, these controls that I have, at any point in time I can go to Control, Tools, Properties, and be able to change any of the properties of the tool. That's fairly easy. What I want to do right now is I want to add a rule, and that's going to say that if it's equal to something, which I've yet to define, go ahead and change the formatting to red or bad. We'll make this high. So I'm just going to type in high, like that. Here's a new rule. Add a rule. If it's equal to something, make it good, and that's going to be if it's low. One more rule. Add rule. If it's equal to something, make it neutral or yellow, and that's going to be this one, normal. Perfect. I got 3 rules. You can just go ahead and mark them so I know what they're for. Alright. Another really cool thing about InfoPath, and there's so much more InfoPath information that we have in our class and in the SharePoint video site, but let me just point out one thing, that InfoPath 2010, you can copy the rules. You can say I want to copy all the rules or copy a certain rule and then paste it into a different control, which is absolutely awesome. That's only in InfoPath 2010. We didn't have that functionality in the previous InfoPath versions. Alright, so I'm fairly done, I think, customizing this form. Let me go ahead and save it. Okay, you can save it, or might as well go ahead and start publishing it. So File, Quick Publish. Quick Publish says I'm going to go ahead and publish it directly to where this form came from. Quick Publish. Very simple, straightforward process to publish this form back to the site. There we go. A form template was published successfully. Great. Let's go to our site and see what happened. So in here, I'm going to go and say add new item. There's a form. Priority, let's change the priority to high, and you'll see now it's red. Change it to low. Put the cursor somewhere else. Here we go. So low is green, working great. Everything the way I want it to be. Let's make it a new tab. Oh, look at that. Task 3, I think. So the formatting is there. Great. It's a required field. Due date, we'll try to make it in the past. Nope, doesn't like it. Enter today's date or date in the future. If I try to save this form, it will not let me. Shouldn't let me. So let me go ahead and click on save now with everything correct. Perfect. Okay. So that's how simple it was to customize the form using InfoPath. Now, of course, you might say to yourself, did you customize a new item form or the edit item form? Which one did you do? Well, the answer to that question was I just went here, right? I went to customize list, customize form. I did not tell it to customize a particular form, edit or new. So it customized everything. If I click on edit item here for task 2, here we go. Same thing. If I do you want yes. Do you want to if you click on a task, this shows you a third form, which is a display form. Doesn't let you change anything, but once again, that's been changed too. That's actually a huge advantage, where if you change the form, you just gotta do it once, and it does it for all 3 versions of all the 3 forms for the list: display, edit, and new. Some people might say that, you know what if I wanted to change just the new or the edit or the display, or what if I wanted different type of forms, different looking forms, different data, different images or whatever on the forms? Can I do that? Absolutely. There's more of a roundabout way of making that happen. So I'll show you quickly over here that let me go back to my SharePoint videos site and top, and I'll go to this pre-built site where it says click here for demonstration, blah blah. So the task modified using InfoPath, let's go here. Oh, and by the way, I still got to talk about the InfoPath form web part stuff as well. We'll get to that in a minute. If I click on add new item here, you see it says new item form, and it's got yellow marking and everything. And I'll go now and edit an item. There we go. It's different coloring. This is the edit form. And if I click on a task, now it shows different coloring because it's a different form altogether. It's the display item form. So I already have that cooked up here for you guys. If you do get access to this environment, you'll be able to see it. Check it out. The way it works out is actually also explained in a video. And it will show you, where is it? If you go to the home page of this particular site, there's a link to the actual video which talks about how you can create, new, edit, and view item forms for SharePoint lists using InfoPath. You may or may not need it, but if you need it, here's the link to that video right here in the environment. Okay. So I tried my best to get all the information to you guys. So after a webinar, like we're doing over here, if you want to get access to the stuff, you can do that and check the stuff out for yourself. Now, like I said before, I did forget to talk about the InfoPath form web part, so let me talk about that right now. Tasks 2. Okay, so I'm at the Tasks 2 list, which has been modified using InfoPath, and I would like to, right down here, show the InfoPath form web part and have the task that I'm modifying directly show up in that web part. So it doesn't show up in a new window, it just shows up right there, right? Just for easy modification, easy viewing. The way that works is, first I'll go and say, let's edit this page. This is a web part page, that's all this really is. So I'll click on add a web part here and look for my web part in forms, InfoPath form web part, that's the one. Okay, and I'm going to move this to the bottom actually. So this will drag it to the bottom. Come on. Or maybe I'll drag this up. I think it's because of my resolution over here. It's not letting me do certain things. Here we go. Okay, so now we have InfoPath form web part below our tasks to view web part. And this web part, by the way, is a list XSLT list view web part. We didn't have to make it. It was already there. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's make a connection and get the form from the tasks to list. Just like that. That is it. Stop editing this page and we are done. Task 1 is right here being shown. Here's task 2. Here's task 3. Now see, in task 3 I didn't assign this to anybody, so I'll go ahead and assign it to myself, Asif. Then I'll click on the save button on the ribbon. Just like that, it's been assigned to me now. Okay, it works beautifully the way it is. Of course, with a caveat that to make all this stuff work on the server here, you need SharePoint Server Enterprise, and at the client machine you need InfoPath for this to work. Well, let me minimize or restore this screen and show you that if you do decide to get access to this environment, which I would highly recommend, it is free for the first 14 days, you got nothing to lose. Then after that, if you feel that you like it, just like I love it personally for my stuff that I do, for my demonstrations and also for my own development that I do, no code development of course, then there's a fee for it. But it's very cool to be able to get access. You can get access to this environment exactly the way it is that I showed you right now, and let me show you that URL again. It's this right here, just in case you want to put it down. And I have this in last slide as well, so I'll show that to you. But it's tinyurl.com/AsifCloudShare. Okay. So a question here also would come up. You know what? Why would I want to do it SharePoint Designer way or InfoPath way? One big thing is licensing, as I mentioned. Huge thing is licensing, I think, actually. Another thing would be that InfoPath is actually an easier way of doing it, and when I say easy, I mean even a person like myself who's in love with SharePoint Designer, I love doing this part with InfoPath and not SharePoint Designer because there's so much stuff you can do and so easy to do it. But a person who's not familiar with SharePoint Designer, InfoPath will work great for that stuff because you do need some technical acumen to be able to do this stuff in SharePoint Designer. All right, I would recommend you join us at a SharePoint Designer training, at Critical Path Training. Webcasts we do just are like the format we're doing this webinar, or we also have in-person classes, so check that out. We're doing one in Houston next week. Check out the videos. The free videos are out there at SharePoint-videos.com, if it makes sense. Here's a CloudShare environment URL again, if you need it. My Twitter ID if you would like to connect. And I would really appreciate if you could fill out the survey of this webinar and let us know, let us at Critical Path Training know that if you could do something better, or if you'd like something, you didn't like something. And I believe now we're going to turn to questions, right, Marshall?
Yeah, sure. That sounds good. I was going to mention to you, we have a webcast of your no-code class coming up next month, May 23rd.
Oh,
five-day
okay.
webcast. And there's a 15% early bird discount if you register before April the 23rd. So if you guys enjoyed this webinar today, you definitely want to check that out. If you want to, Asif, we have quite a few questions here. You want to go ahead and start going through them?
Yeah, of course, I've not been looking at any of them. I've been doing the demo, but let me expand this questions and answer screen. And
yeah, folks have been busy.
Yeah, I guess so. There's one. I don't know if. Oh, okay, this is assigned to me. What is the SharePoint Designer URL? To Syed, if you want to just look for SharePoint Designer on the web, just on Bing.com or Google.com, SharePoint Designer 32-bit is what you want to find out, get access to, and download it. You need to, of course, have a operating system which is Microsoft based, and then you can install it on Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows Vista. I'm not sure if Windows XP would actually be okay, but anyway, you could try that out. I've not tried that out. Windows 7 or Windows Vista would work just fine with SharePoint Designer 2010, and SharePoint Designer 2007, which is also free. You can use that for your SharePoint 2007 environment. That works on XP and beyond. Okay, let's see. So I'm looking for the questions that have been promoted to me over here. It says, Ross, you're saying if you have Office 2010 64-bit, it won't let you install the 32-bit version of SharePoint Designer. That is a good point. That is, if you have Office 2010 64-bit, then you will not be able to install SharePoint Designer 32-bit. Ross, another thing about that is there are issues with the Office 2010 64-bit as well, unfortunately, that I've seen. But if you've not seen it, that's great. I use 32-bit for all my client Office software. I've just not had the courage to go to 64-bit because of the issues that I had a few months ago. So, but if it's working out, great. I would love to know about it. Now, Bobby, you're asking, do you have to specify which field to include in the form? What if you have multiple content types that each have different fields? Does a form know how to hide or show based on content type selection? Yeah, that's an excellent question, Bobby. So what we modified was the form that was based on the task content type. If you were to make a new form, if you want to make a form that was for a different content type, the way you would do that is you would do it at the content type level. You would not do it at the list level like we did, but you would go to the content type, make a new content type, of course, or existing content type, and then you make the modifications to the form there. And then you would attach that content type to the list or library. That's how it would work out. Great question. Okay. Julie, you're asking if you have multiple content types associated with the list. Oh, okay. It's the same one. So can you customize each form separately for each different content type? That's the same thing. Ben, your question, if new columns are added to a list, are they reflected in the form that is being created? Excellent question. If new columns are added to a list, they are not reflected in the form, unfortunately. So that's definitely a bummer. You have to go and actually modify the form to include the field in there, and that is the case for both methods, InfoPath and SharePoint Designer. Okay. Thank you, Ben. Ken, your question is, how do you apply these techniques to anonymous forms where the form should be anonymous but the data private? Especially with the anonymous forms, and I'm talking about InfoPath specifically here, there are issues, and InfoPath team knows about it. And the reason it's not really the InfoPath application itself that creates the issue, but the reason is the way SharePoint, well, the way they are handled within the forms. Sorry, let me say this again. The way the anonymous user is handled within the forms. It doesn't use the iUser anonymous entity that we have in Windows. It uses it differently. And because of that, the anonymous form, just the management of anonymous forms and everything else doesn't work great with InfoPath. If you found a way to work around that, that would be great. But I would not, at least so far I would not recommend going that route. So I would not even know if there's a reason I should go forward and answer this question, because I would not recommend doing it that way personally. Let's see, Christine, you say maybe I missed a step in the demo, but how did the list library know to use a new edit form? Yeah, see, this is what I was talking about, that you didn't miss a step, Christine. When I customized the form, it modified all the forms, new, edit, and display forms. Good question though, Christine. This is another question, Christine. How do you transport what you've developed on a dev server in SharePoint Designer to the production server? That's always a sticky question, Christine. Transporting from a dev environment to production environment, the stuff that you do in SharePoint Designer, can be accomplished if you package the site as a WSP file, which you can do pretty easily. Just go to Save as Template and then deploy the whole site to the to the other level, the production level. You can also save a list as a template. You can also save a list as a template and then just deploy that list to production, and that will contain the forms and everything else. The problem arises when you already have a list in production, you've been using it heavily, and it's not been replicated. Of course it will not be most probably in development, so doesn't have the same data, doesn't have the same structure anymore. Then you don't want to replace your production list, of course, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and say this out loud in the webinar so everybody can hear this. It is okay to work directly in production with SharePoint Designer. Okay, I've had numerous conversations with customers from within Microsoft, with other MVPs, and as a person who contributed and wrote a huge part of the SharePoint Designer 2010 book and also SharePoint Designer 2007 book, I'm going to go ahead and say this, that it is definitely okay to go into production with SharePoint Designer. I know some companies will not like that, but it's the truth. That is a recommended way to go about, especially the stuff that you already have in place. All right. Bobby, your question is, there's no way to design document library form using InfoPath. Is that correct? No, that's not completely correct, unless I'm missing something here. You can design document library form, some of the forms. So you have the edit properties form, right? You can design that. Oh, I'm sorry, you said using InfoPath. Oh, sorry. I thought you meant SharePoint Designer. With SharePoint Designer, you can go ahead and design a document library form, like the edit form with SharePoint Designer, but that is correct, not with InfoPath. InfoPath gives you the SharePoint list form modifications. Good question, Bobby. Ellen, in SharePoint Designer 2007, there was a problem using attachments in customized list forms. Is this working in InfoPath forms? InfoPath forms with attachments work great. Yes, so that is working, no problems at all with customized lists. Christine, can you conditionally require a field dependent upon a value entered for another field? If so, would you do that with SharePoint Designer or InfoPath? You can do that with either, actually. Yes, you can conditionally require a field. The way you would do that is you would hide or delete or not show a section of the form and then make that a required control within the section that you want to require. You can do that with either one. Technically, definitely possible. You're going to find that it's easier to do that in InfoPath than SharePoint Designer, but you can do it with both. Marshall, let me know how much time we have, by the way. I don't want to go overboard. I'll continue to answer questions otherwise. Okay, so...
Yeah, sure. I'll set maybe a couple more questions, then I'll be great.
Okay, absolutely. I'll do 2 or 3 more here. Can you create rules like this in SharePoint Designer also, or just in InfoPath forms? So I'm assuming that you're talking about the rules that I did in InfoPath. Absolutely, Susan, you can do that in SharePoint Designer as well. It's just that you have to use the required field validator or the range field validator or other validators like that, which exist in SharePoint Designer. So they're actually controls that you place on the form and then hook it up to other controls. So it's much more difficult, and it's much more kind of like a developer-like stuff that you're doing. So it's possible, but it's more difficult to do it in SharePoint Designer. Shiva or Siva, your question. can you use InfoPath 2010 to create InfoPath forms 2007 version? No, you cannot. Okay, let me see. Can you use InfoPath 2010 to create InfoPath forms for SharePoint 2007 Enterprise System? You cannot, unfortunately. So InfoPath 2010 and SharePoint 2010 is required for this functionality, Siva. Okay. Other than the licensing issue, are there other reasons to use InfoPath over SharePoint Designer or vice versa? Lisa is asking. Licensing and ease of use are the two main reasons that I would say. So, excuse me. I would recommend using InfoPath if you have the licensing. Otherwise, SharePoint Designer works as well, of course. Let's see. I'll skip Fred's question since he is left already. Brooke, your question is, as a default, when you create a new list, SharePoint includes a save and cancel button at the bottom of the page. I noticed those buttons are missing on your form, and you can only use a save button at the top. Okay, so if you wanted to put the save and cancel button, you can definitely do that in InfoPath, but you would have to put it there. Otherwise, it just uses the ribbon. That is correct. But putting a button like a save and cancel is actually fairly easy to do, Brooke, in InfoPath, and then you can give them the functionality that you're looking for. And you know what? In addition to that, you can also have buttons which are picture buttons, so they show the save or something like that. That works really, really nicely. So you can do lots of cool things like that in InfoPath. All right, Marshall, what do you think? Should we go on or should I stop?
One more question.
Okay. Alrighty.
All right, last question. Yep.
Last question. Paul. Hi, Asif. Great video. Thank you. One question I have is, what deployment options are available for these modified forms? So, for example, would I have to make these changes on the customer site? I would like to install two lists together with modified forms. Yeah, so Paul, what I would recommend in any situation that I showed so far, the first time you do it, you could package everything up and deploy it on a fresh production site. But then afterwards, using InfoPath or using SharePoint Designer, my recommendation would be to go directly to the customer site, directly to the production site to make it happen. And I'm assuming you're making backups, of course, of all this other stuff before you make any changes. But yes, that is the recommended way. You do have to go directly into production to make these things happen. If you don't like doing it that way, then the other option is to use Visual Studio, okay, to do that. All right, so I enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you very much once again for everybody, for you guys coming. Hopefully you can join us in one of the classes at Critical Path Training, and let us know if you have any questions. Check out the videos also on SharePointVideos.com site, and let me know if you have any thoughts on that. So thanks a lot, and I'm done.
Thank you, Asif. And for everyone, please don't forget, next week our webinar is going to be a SharePoint ribbon customization deep dive with Andrew Connell. Another great session that you don't want to miss. It's going to start at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, Eastern Daylight Time, next Thursday. So be sure to check it out. Until then, we appreciate everyone participating. Please check out criticalpathtraining.com for our courses and our schedule. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, everyone.